The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel General Grant by himself or Dr. E.C. Fields, on the Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and on various other social media. The website is generalgrantbyhimself.com. This program is one of those presentations in the ongoing series General Grant Looks at the American Civil War, wherein General Grant looks at a person, place, or event in the Civil War for reflection and observation. Permission to copy and distribute is given and indeed encouraged. Remember, you are the future of our past. And now, General Grant looks at the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I am General of the Army Ulysses S. Grant, and this day I should like to reflect with you the events leading up to the assassination of President Lincoln. What transpired within my realm. We had, after the surrender of Lee on the 9th of April, I had finally made my way back to my dispatch boat and went into Washington City. I had met Julia, and we went into Washington City on the night of the 12th, had Jesse with us, our youngest son. Our other three children, Fred and Buck and Nellie, are all in school in Burlington, New Jersey. And we went to secure rooms at Willard's Hotel. On the morning of April the 13th, I was up early and out. I had to go to the War Department, and I had to go meet with the President and speak with him at length, because he was most anxious to hear what had happened between Lee and myself. We met there while Julia went to the War Department. And Secretary Stanton's wife was at the War Department. And after a while, he had left the meeting between the President and myself and went to the War Department. And there he took great delight in showing Julia all manner of souvenirs from the war. And most interesting to her, and then to me when I got there later on, was an entire tree stump that had been taken from the battlefield at Shiloh, riddled with bullets from all directions. But Julia had a very nice time with Mrs. Stanton, whom she is great friends, and Secretary Stanton, taking delight in showing souvenirs, and then I joined. So that's how we spent most of the 13th of April. I at the executive residence with President Lincoln, and for a while Secretary Stanton, and Julia at the Secretary of War with Mrs. Stanton. Then Secretary Stanton joined, I joined, and we all went through the War Department and saw the trophies and souvenirs. There was going to be a great illumination that night. For the first time during the war, actually, Washington was going to be as lit up as it could be with candles and lights in celebration of the war being over. And it was being known as the Great Illumination, and Julia was anxious to see it. I said even the Navy Department's going to be illuminated, because they came over and borrowed 3 boxes of candles from us at the War Department. And I had been asked to go with Mr. Lincoln to see the lights, and Julia to go with Mrs. Lincoln. She declined that honor and was dismayed that I would not be with her. And I said, that's all right, I'll join you after the President and I have seen the lights. And the President was suffering with a terrible headache that night, but he went anyway. So Julia and Mrs. Stanton and Mr. Stanton saw the lights of the city. I saw them with the President. And an early evening of it, the Lincolns, or President Lincoln, went back to the executive residence. I joined Julia and the Stantons, and then we went to the Stantons' home where we received for the evening. And even the secretary chided me and he said, "Well, General, it seems like everybody wants to see you." So we had a nice time with the Stantons. They're good friends, people coming, hail fellow, well met. Then we went back to the Willard Hotel. The president had invited me to go to the cabinet meeting the morning of the 15th, and I felt it important that I do so. Julia had impressed upon me, we're going home. I want to see our children. Fred, Buck, and Nellie are over there. Haven't seen them in eons, it seems. Jesse, our youngest, was with us. So she cautioned me, don't get caught up in something with the president. We're going to see our children. And I went to the cabinet meeting, and at that meeting, when it was over about midday, the president did indeed invite me and Julia to attend the play that night at Ford's Theater, which I understand had been held over. And I think perhaps even for that event, but it was an extremely popular play, and I understand very funny. Laura Keene, a great famous actress, was in it, and I'm a fond theater fan, great theater fan, and I wanted to go. But Julia said, no, we're going to see our children. Don't accept any invitations anywhere with the Lincolns. But the President Lincoln did invite me. And I said, no, I'll try to go, but we really want to see our children, so we'll be going to Burlington. And at the same time, Mrs. Stanton had sent Julia a note that said, I asked, are you going to the play tonight? Because if you are, I will, but if you're not, I'm going to refuse the invitation. Because she said, Mrs. Stanton said, I refuse to sit in that box with Mrs. Lincoln. Julia told her, no, we're not going to go. Mrs. Stanton then in turn declined. And when I got back to the Willard's Hotel room, Julia's packing up, and we actually were loaned the use of General Daniel Rucker's carriage, and he and his wife are with us. Carriage is filled with luggage, and we're on the way across Washington City to get to the railroad station. While we're on that trip, that road, a man with a mustache, pale complexion, galloped his horse up beside our carriage and stuck his head in and almost face to face with me. And then he jerked it back out, spurred his horse, and galloped off. Went just a short way, reined in his horse, turned around, galloped back, and again stuck his head in the carriage, looking directly at me. I didn't care for that, and Mrs. Rucker said, it doesn't seem like people are hesitant about trying to find you, General. And he said, and I said, no, and that wasn't friendly indeed. It concerned me. I became more concerned when Julia was all excited and said, that's the man who was at lunch with us this afternoon. And I said, what man? And she told me, related this sequence of events. After I had left to go to the executive residence to meet with President Lincoln, there's a knock on the door. Julia said, come in. A man stepped in that she'd never seen, and she said he was roughly dressed, had on light-colored corduroy trousers, a light-colored matching corduroy coat, and indeed his hat even matched it. She'd never seen him before, and she described him as looking nervous and alert, and said, Mrs. Julia Grant. And she said, I am. And he said, I've got a message for you from Mrs. Lincoln. She says she will come and pick you up tonight at 8 o'clock to go to the theater. Be ready. This struck Julia crossways in a couple of different ways. First of all, she didn't like the command that was given, I will be there to pick you up at 8. And secondly, she didn't like being obligated to something that she was not party to. She'd already told me, don't accept any invitations. And she all told me she'd already sent a message to me at the War Department and then sent 3 different staff officers to the War Department, all telling me, all 4 telling me, don't get involved in anything. We're going to Burlington, New Jersey. She told the messenger, and that's all I know him as, the messenger, go back and tell Mrs. Lincoln that we cannot attend tonight. We appreciate the invitation. We will not attend. And he retorted, but all of the newspapers say that the president will be joined by General Grant tonight at the play. And Julia said, they may say what they say. I'm telling you, we're going to Burlington, New Jersey, and you tell that to Mrs. Lincoln. You may leave. She said he hesitated like he didn't want to leave, but she said again, you may leave. And he bowed and smiled. She said he almost grinned at her, stepped back and closed the door. I said, indeed. Then she called or sent a message to Emma Rawlins, General Rawlins' wife, and said she wanted to have lunch with her. They had a late lunch at a restaurant not far from Willard's. After they'd sat down to eat, 4 men came in and sat at a table very close to them. And all 4 of them were obviously listening to their conversation. The leader, or apparent leader of the group, she described him as a pale, dark man. Dark, that ciphers out to be a dark-headed man with very pale skin and a mustache. He was apparently the leader, she said, and he kept fooling with his soup spoon, and he would scoop it and get it almost to his lips and then put it down. He never took a sip of soup, but he was focused, all 4 of them, on what Emma Rawlins and Julia were saying. And Julia said, I leaned over and asked Emma, do you see those 4 men at that table? Don't say anything but look. She did. And she said, do they not seem to be paying attention to us and listening to our conversation? Emma said they did indeed. And she said, this disturbs me. We must leave. So Emma and her daughter that she'd brought got up. Julia and Jesse, our youngest son, got up and they left. So into the afternoon, when I came back to Willard's for us to leave to go to Burlington, this individual that had ridden up beside our carriage indeed went up, came back and looked in. Julia said, that's the same man that was in the restaurant today. He's the same fellow. And this is strange indeed, very strange indeed. And I was not comfortable with that either. But we went on and got on the cars. I was very pleased. President John W. Garrett, he was president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, had loaned his personal car to us. And so we got in the car. I had no security staff, nobody with us. It was just Julia and Jesse, a child, and myself. When we got in the car, though, the conductor locked the platform into the car. We settled in, and before we got to Baltimore, somebody was trying to get in the door that the conductor had locked. Tried hard, banging and jerking, twisting the doorknob, and could not get in. I know I didn't get up and check. It didn't last long. The conductor who was with us got up and went to the end of the car and locked the other door after that. The way we had to go was into Philadelphia. Then you crossed the Delaware River on the ferry into Camden, New Jersey, and took the cars on to whatever destination. We got into Philadelphia close to midnight and stopped at Bloodgood's Hotel after we had gone across the city. And the only way you did that was carriage or in an ambulance. We rode in an ambulance and got to the river to wait for the ferry and went in Bloodgood's Hotel there on the river. I hadn't had anything to eat since breakfast that morning. I ordered a large helping of oysters, one of my favorite foods, and we settled in to wait for the ferry to get ready. I had Captain Samuel Beckwith with me. He's my personal telegrapher who's been with me since almost back to Donaldson. And after Donaldson, with all that fall to raw with the communications, the rebel telegrapher between us and Halleck, and I almost got court-martialed, I began carrying my own telegrapher, Sam Beckwith. He's often teased. He's the only man in the country, indeed in the Army, who knows everything I know. Everything. And because I give him messages, he telegraphs them in cipher, in code. So the receiving telegrapher gets a message that's not the intended message, it's in code. So the receiving telegrapher doesn't get the message. The receiving officer can decode it. So Sam Beckwith is the only man in the country who knows everything I do. He's called Grant's shadow. But Sam was with us. He was called out of the dining room. He comes back in and he looks shaken. He had a telegram. And that telegram said this. It was from Major Thomas T. Eckert to General Grant, and said, at 12:20 a.m., April 15th, 1865, the telegraph reads, "The President was assassinated at Ford's Theater at 10:30 tonight and cannot live. The wound is a pistol through the head." Secretary Seward and his son Frederick were also assassinated at their residence and are in a dangerous condition. The Secretary of War desires that you return to Washington immediately. I just hung my head. Julia asked me, of course, what's the matter? And I told her, do not get excited or make any sounds, but read this, and passed it to her. She read it and was silent for a moment and burst into tears. And she said, "This means Andy Johnson is the president, isn't it? Doesn't it?" And I said, "Yes, it does. And I've got a bad feeling about that." But I told her, and I got 2 more telegrams in quick succession with the same messages. I told her that we were so close, less than an hour or so away, that I would go on to Burlington, see the children for a bit, and return early the next morning, which I did. I left actually before daylight. In the messages sent to me from the secretary, he had told Sam Beckwith to telegraph ahead and clear the rails between Philadelphia and Washington City for my train. He also ordered that a pilot locomotive be in front of my train, because it was believed now that I was a target for assassination as well. And they at the time had no idea who was involved, how many were involved, how deep and wide the scheme was, the plot. I returned to Washington City, and for the next 3 days, 4 days, I was involved in the business of the government in the transition and in the planning for President Lincoln's funeral. Now, when I left, I had told Julia on the morning of the 15th, whatever telegrams or mail messages that you get from me, open them and let me know what they are if I need to know. One of those messages was an anonymous letter, handwritten letter, and it said this: "General Grant, thank God, as I do, that you still live. It was your life that fell to my lot, and I followed you on the cars. Your car door was locked, and thus you escaped me. Thank God." No signature, nothing on the envelope, but Julia told me about that. So I got that message the morning of the 15th. We had President Lincoln's funeral on the 19th in the East Room at the executive residence, and I had the place of honor at the head of his casket. And ordinarily, I'm described as stoic. I'm, for the most part, emotionless man, but I sobbed throughout the entire funeral. I sobbed. I'd lost a friend. I'd only known him about 13 months, but we had come to be deep and fast friends. We'd worked together to help bring about the end of the war, and he was a good man. I knew Lincoln through and through. He was a good man. And I was in fear because the South had lost its best friend. The South was going to suffer the most at the death of Lincoln. And I was feeling those feelings of angst and grief and sorrow all together. But I cried throughout Lincoln's funeral. That is the sequence of events that happened to me from the night of April the 12th until the day of April the 19th. What all transpired. And it's a marvel to me. I will say that I regret not having been with the president that night. Obviously, I was a target as well, but I think things would have been substantially different if I had been with the president at Ford's Theater the night of April the 14th, 1865, and our country's history might be different. But that's indulging in conjecture, and I'm reluctant to indulge in conjecture. So until we come together again and reflect on a person, a place, or event in the Civil War, I am General of the Army Ulysses S. Grant, and I bid you a fond and a sad one this day adieu.